This is where the end of cancer begins, when together we stand as one.
I ask only one thing of you. Will you stand up with me? Will you stand up to cancer?
How moving it really is to see Patrick Swayze there, who taught us all so much about happiness, really, and courage and hope in the face of cancer. And we are very honored to have with us the person who put that all together, really. Laura Ziskin is one of the founders of Stand Up to Cancer. She is a renowned motion picture and television producer as well. You probably have seen Pretty Woman, maybe Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, and all of her movies. And she was obviously very instrumental in making that happen. And I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we'll hear from them. Dr. Laura Shawver, I got it right, CEO of Phenomix Corporation. She's an active member of the American Association for Cancer Research, editor of one of its top journals, a member of the Stand Up to Cancer Scientific Advisory Committee, and she is also a cancer survivor. Amy Dockser Marcus has won the Pulitzer Prize at the Wall Street Journal. She has reported from the Mideast and other places, but she won the Pulitzer for her series about the physical, emotional, and monetary challenges facing cancer patients and their families. And Delta Goodrem is one of Australia's most successful music stars ever. Period. I understand you outsold Elvis in Australia. I'm not sure I like that, but I'm happy for you. And
I apologize.
she is here as well. I'm going to start with you, Delta.
Okay.
This extraordinary panel that we have. We're talking about the fight against cancer and throughout the day, biomedical research to get after these diseases, cancer and others, diseases we associate with those of us who may be getting along in years. What are you doing here?
I'm a cancer survivor. I was 18 years old when I was diagnosed. I had just broken through on the charts. It was an incredible time where you work so hard and then you become #1 on the charts. And I was flying back from the UK to Australia, going back and forth on a full-time television show to my records, making all these, a magical moment, when a moment happens in time. And these messages, ironically, in my songs that I write were all about being born to try and about life, and I'm fascinated by writing about life. And of course, cancer doesn't discriminate, so whilst I had those #1 records, cancer decided to knock on my door at the same time. It's brilliant timing, but again, you can't, that's how, cancer doesn't care whether you have the #1 record or what you were doing. It's life for human beings, and is that me? I apologize. I was making a bit of beats to show you a bit of a, not really. And then basically what happened was obviously spending that amount of time from the world of entertainment to the world of oncology, the world of hematology, learning about your world and science and learning about that road that you can only talk about as an individual when you've actually walked through it. I was obviously inspired, and I wanted to give back in whatever way I could to my doctors, the heroes and the angels that I looked up to, and these people that I looked at in such admiration. And I asked them, what can I do to help? I said, well, I'm here, and people were donating to the hospital. And I said, no, I need something concrete. I need to be able to bring something to life like Laura and everyone did with Stand Up for Cancer. You need to bring it to fruition. You need to be able to have those ideas, understand. We have a whole panel of cancer survivors here. So you need to be able to have another understanding of that level, and to obviously join hands with yourselves and many people who play their part is incredible. So briefly, just to keep going, I am finished soon. Back in Sydney, Australia, I started this project with my hospital, St Vincent's Hospital. We joined with the Garvan Research Institute, and the two of us came together. We asked the government for funding, and they were so kind, and they donated $70 million towards our facility, and we got $30 million from private donors. And from all different things I had done, we put it all into this facility, which is going to be built in 2011. But the most exciting part is that it is with clinicians and researchers under the same roof and working much closer with the patient. And therefore, I think the message of that, when we started in Australia, it hadn't been done And obviously over here that message resonates with we're all trying to be together as one instead of individually fighting and competing. We need to be able to be human and come together and make a difference.
I think what's extraordinary about today, starting this morning with Alzheimer's, talking about HIV/AIDS, it's the same story. We're all in the same boat. We're all facing terrible problem, particularly with an aging population, not just in this country, but globally in terms of the number of cancer cases. You know, 1,500 Americans die every day from cancer in this country. And I always like to do a little experiment, and a lot of people left, but if they were here, it would be the same experiment. Would you raise your hand if you or a family member has been touched by cancer? So look around. That's everybody. And this is an increasing problem, not just a health problem and a human problem, but a huge economic problem. So the Livestrong organization just commissioned a report from The Economist, and they estimated that the cost of cancer, the 2009 cost of cancer, is $300 billion.
Thank you. Laura, I want to ask you about cancer and how it affected the way you look at the science, the way you look at science.
And she's a rock star.
And a rock star.
She is a rock star.
Well, I've been doing science since the early 80s and drug development for the last 25 years, and much of it was translational. We hear this buzzword, translational or personalized, and what translational means is that instead of working with cells in a petri dish, we're actually taking a patient's tumor and taking it into the lab and trying to understand what the molecular underpinnings are on an individualized basis, and that's what we were doing in the lab every day. And so when I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, I thought, oh, I would be able to be able to understand the blueprint of my own tumor. And in fact, what I found out is that we throw the words personalized medicine around, but here I was 3 years ago with ovarian cancer. I could not get the blueprint of my tumor. It was not possible 3 years ago. And what Stand Up to Cancer and the Dream Teams are about is they insisted that the money go to have an impact in 3 years' time. So that 3 years ago, while it was not possible, in 3 years from now, if you or your family member is diagnosed with cancer, how can they have their blueprint of their tumor determined, and how can it best be matched with treatment? Dr. Collins already talked about that on an individualized basis. How are we going to do that? We've had the genomics revolution where we've had an explosion of data. We've had a tremendous number of new drugs that have been approved and are in the pipeline, but we now need to match that data, those drugs, with the individual patient.
And that's the goal, right?
That's the goal, that's absolutely.
How close are we to that goal?
Well, we're 3 years away.
with our teams, but I think what's important to remember is what you've heard here today from the beginning of the day a few hours ago is that the science and the technology is at this really critical kind of perfect storm. We know things we've never known before. The funding, at the moment when we can make it happen, the funding we understand all the issues facing this country and the world. The funding has decreased, but again, when you look at the cost-benefit analysis, we must do this. We must change the way we think about it, or we're going to be in much bigger trouble down the road.
There's been a war on cancer now for, what, 35 years? 50?
Long time.
Long time. So in your research and writing, congratulations on the Pulitzer Prize.
Thank you.
Why is there still a struggle for awareness, activism, support around this after so many years?
It's not only about funding, because if we continue to throw money in the same way at the same problems, I think actually we're not going to be further along, even if we increase the amount of money. What I've been researching for the past few years has been innovative models of collaboration that are driven by patient advocates working closely with scientists. Many of these advocates came into this because they had uncommon cancers, ones for which treatments are basically ineffective and for which virtually no research is being done. They found themselves in a position where they had to raise money themselves, and they had to actually create the scientific blueprint, working with the scientists to figure out what needed to be done. Many of the things that needed to be done were things that will never get done because they don't lead to published papers, and they don't lead to funding from NIH, and they don't lead to advancement within your institution where you're trying to make your way. And no scientist should be asked to have to give up their own career to do this. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. So what these advocates did is they figured out, working with these scientists, what needed to be done, and they either went out and bought what they needed, through outsourcing, and then gave it to the scientists and got them going, or they incentivized scientists to do what they needed to do. I think that the patients themselves are the most effective advocates, far more effective with a congressman or with even a scientist than anyone else could be, because their lives are at stake. They don't have 10 years to wait, for everything to work its way through the system. So they went out and they did it. And that has been sort of the body of my reporting. And I think that this model is effective, but it also puts so much pressure on patients who are also struggling with their own sicknesses and with their treatments, or their caregivers to someone who's ill. And what I'd like to see is this model to get some acceptance and even some support within the infrastructure. And I've argued in some of my writing that we have to think outside the box to develop new funding mechanisms, or even ways to put these patients together with the scientists. Because these are patients that have educated themselves and are serious and want good science, but they need it to be done much more quickly than it's being done.
We talk a lot in every creative endeavor about high risk, high reward, but we actually have to put a tranche of money into real high risk, high reward, because we're at this moment in time where we actually can make cancer a chronic manageable disease. So tragic to hear Dr. Collins say that we're not a leader. How can we not be a leader in science and technology and curing disease? It's just crazy. And every time we've done something extraordinary in this country, and Mr. Vandenberg talked about polio, not that many people were afflicted with polio, but the entire country was invested and engaged in making sure there was money to find a cure. And, we don't know whose dollar it was that, finally led to that cure, but we have to do the same thing.
And take a leadership position. And when I go home, or I'll tell my daughter who loves science that I met a crackerjack scientist. Thank you all for making a difference.